What is up, guys? Doing another one down tips video. It's been a little while and decided to go ahead and make a new one. So today what I'm going to be running through is I'm going to be highlighting what I consider the best perk decks for one down. And I'm going to talk a bit about what kind of playstyles that benefit most, what kind of playstyles you could use in order to get the most out of them, and things of that nature. We'll be talking about their pros, their cons, and some different stuff. I know I covered a lot of this in an earlier perk decks video a while back. However, I'm going to be trying to go into a little bit more detail with some actual gameplay of each of these better perk decks. So this is going to be a more centralized way of looking at that, if you want to consider it that. Alright, so first things first, let's go ahead and take a look at Armorer. So, jumping right into things, Armorer is, in my opinion, one of the most reliable perk decks for one down loud. But let's go ahead and talk about its bonuses. I'll throw the bonuses up on the screen. Of course, you get 35% extra armor, 10% extra armor recovery rate. You get 10% less armor recovery time for you and your crew, or like a reduction in recovery time, the amount of time that you have to spend for your armor to regenerate. And you get 2 seconds of invulnerability on depleted armor, which is on a 15-second cooldown. Crew perks don't stack, and things of that nature. So what are the pros of Armor? Well, the pros are, of course, that it's, in essence, it's reliable. As you're seeing here, the Murky Water Guards don't do as much damage as other units do on one down, particularly the heavy SWAT unit, so I'm taking lots of what I would consider chip damage, and I'm not really having to suffer for it because my armor is tanking most of the shots, whereas running something like, I don't know, like dodge or whatever, a lot of that probably would have went to health hits if I wouldn't have dodged the majority of those shots. Regardless, it's also intuitive. Armor is just an extremely intuitive way to play. It's just kind of a tanky way to play. It kind of endorses more of a campy and holdout type playstyle. You can definitely hold your own. Things of the nature. Some of the cons, however, is typically these armor builds are going to be a lot slower because they generally require the ICTV in order to get the most effect out of them. However, some players don't seem to mind this, and it all comes down to preference. Some people definitely prefer the reliability and the consistency of armor as opposed to some of the more dodge-oriented perk decks. Of course, one of the strongest points of armor being the fact that it has that 2 seconds of invulnerability whenever your armor goes down, which is something you can mentally keep track of. If you have a hard time mentally keeping track of it using the in-game timer and keeping track of when your armor's busted and roughly after 15 seconds have passed and things like that, you can download HUD mods that show your current buffs and let you look at, down at the bottom of my screen, for instance, there you can see when my armor breaks all the way, you will see that I'll get an invulnerability bonus, which should be like a little red square with a little white square inside it running down as the armor runs out. So how would I describe the playstyle that's associated with armor? Consistent, methodical, definitely tanky, and honestly it just feels a lot harder to get caught off guard. Does that mean that you can't get caught off guard? No, absolutely. You can still get caught by some, heavy SWAT units that'll just completely rip you to shreds due to their damage output. However, it's a lot harder to get caught off guard by more standard units. You're really not looking at getting 2-shot or even 3-shot by most units, especially with the invulnerability, as you saw it was going on right there just a moment ago. And it's just extremely, not only versatile playstyle, but it's just very consistent and it's very reliable. You don't have to worry about RNG screwing you over when you're running armor, and that is one of the biggest buffs concerning armor. So it's definitely a good perk deck, although like I said, it almost requires the usage of an ICTV in order to get its maximum benefits on one down. Of course, the purpose of these videos in general is just to primarily talk about one down play. So you can sort of generalize this for lower difficulties as well. However, a lot of the information is going to change to some degree or another due to the way damage outputs differ between the difficulties and so forth. Okay, so now moving on to dodge. Sitting on the other end of the spectrum from armor, of course, we have dodge, which primarily entails running a suit, and, well, certainly in the case of Rogue running a suit. It might not be the case for Crook. However, definitely for Rogue, you're probably going to be running a suit in order to get the maximum benefits of dodge, and The bonuses that you get from the Rogue perk deck are a 45% chance to, a flat chance to dodge enemy bullets, meaning you will completely ignore any damage applied to you if you get, you know, the appropriate chance. There's a 15% less chance to be targeted when you're close to your crewmates. You have a 25% chance to pierce enemy armor, which it's kind of negligible. And you have an 80% increase in your weapon swap speed. Of course, the primary defensive capabilities from Rogue come from the fact that you get a very large boost to your dodge percentage. The standard dodge percentage being 5, and that being boosted by 45 raises you to a base of 50 when you're running Rogue with a suit. Of course, you can increase this with Sneaky Bastard, and the maximum dodge you can run with Rogue at a standstill, if I'm not mistaken, is currently at a 60% dodge chance. So the greater percentage of the time, whenever you're shot at, you're going to completely dodge any bullets that come your way, meaning you won't take any sort of damage whatsoever. One of the upsides to running dodges, you have, of course, the increased weapon swap speed as well as an increased movement speed because you're not being slowed down by armor. You're very nimble, very quick, able to duck in and out of cover, get out of sticky situations a bit more quickly. However, the benefits of dodge are also, in the same sense, its downfalls. Although there is a chance to completely ignore damage, it's not something you can actively control. You cannot control how much luck... I mean, you can control the situations you're in to a certain extent. However, you can't choose when you do and when you do not dodge. So, it's completely up to the dice in order to get the most out of this perk deck. Now, of course, you can increase your chances by taking calculated risks, which is a very large part of properly playing a dodge build. You know, playing out of cover intelligently, picking your spots very carefully, and knowing when your chances are probably good that you're not going to go down. It doesn't mean you'll always get your chances. You know, that's part of the downside to dodge. It doesn't have the same consistency, for instance, that an armor build would have. However, rogue builds do offer versatility in the sense that even if you do get caught off guard, sometimes, you know, you'll get covered by dodge and you just won't go down if a few heavy swats and a dozer pop around the corner and shoot at you. But, you know, in that same vein, it can be very easy to just be 2 or 3 shot by enemy units that deal, you know, enough damage to do so, just because RNG isn't on your side. So the odds of being, if enemies did enough damage to 2-shot you, for instance, if you're looking at like a dozer, for example, let's say an enemy unit shoots at you and there's a dozer standing in front of you, so the enemy unit breaks your armor and then the dozer is preparing to shoot at you. Well, the odds, if you're at a standstill, of getting hit the first time is a 40% chance, because that's 1 minus your chance of being, or your 1 minus your chance of dodging, of course. So that's what's left over is your chance of being hit, which is 40% if you're running maximum dodge at a standstill. Combining that with the next chance of the independent shot of being hit by the dozer in sequence is going to be 40% times 40%, or 0.4 times 0.4, or the odds of just getting completely 2-shot in that situation should be about a 16% chance. So, although probably higher than people would like to say, it's also really not that bad if you consider it in the grand scheme of things. Had my first aid kit not been there, I would have died pretty readily in that situation. And so, if you're not covered in certain circumstances like that with dodge, it can be very difficult to get yourself out of those. Dodge doesn't have the same sort of reliable invulnerability on armor breaking like Armorer does, so it's something you miss out there. However, you are able to take calculated risk and put yourself in positions that other players probably wouldn't be able to, and still be relatively safe. Even in places of relatively open cover, dodge can still do just fine because of, you know, just purely the ability to just not get hit at all. Whereas if there's no cover for, as we'll discuss in a little bit, a Kingpin build, it can sort of spell disaster in certain circumstances. So the playstyle that's kind of associated with dodging is, you definitely want to be kind of skirtish, you want to be quick, you want to be very good at out-of-cover play, dodging in and out of cover, moving from cover to cover. Something, of course, you need to be comfortable with any of your builds, but is more so important with dodge because armor gating is a very important part of dodge. realizing when you're not dodging and when your armor is broken and ducking into cover is an important thing. However, another important thing to keep in mind is not trying to, I mean, this comes in with calculated risk, not always trying to abuse dodge by saying, I think I can get through this situation by just hoping. You know, you have to look at a situation and say, I can probably cover this area, and odds are good that I won't get down because there aren't that many enemies here. Whereas other perk decks might not have the ability to do so. So calculated risk is definitely a large part of running a dodge build. So now, let's go ahead and take a look at kind of an in-between part of, or in between the spectrum of armor and dodge. And let's go ahead and take a look at Anarchist. So, we've looked at a very tanky type of play, and we've also looked at a very skirtishy type of play. So the interesting thing about Anarchist is its style of play is, on one hand, kind of careful because you're relying on armor gating as your primary source of protection, but you can also play relatively aggressive in order to armor gate more effectively by getting more kills and keeping your armor up. So with Anarchist, 50% of your health is converted into 120% armor. You get plus 10 armor regen on dealing damage with a 1.5 second cooldown. If I'm not mistaken, this value is actually fluctuated a little bit. It's not a flat 10 armor regen on dealing damage. I think it gives more. I'm not 100% sure on the value, but I've seen some pretty frequent discussion that the value isn't exactly what it appears to me. However, like Armorer rather, you get 2 seconds of invulnerability whenever your armor is depleted with a 15-second cooldown. Your armor does not regenerate like it normally would with other perk decks. It has a continuous armor regeneration, and the amount of armor that you regenerate and the speed at which you regenerate it depends on the armor type you're wearing. If you're wearing a suit, roughly every 2 seconds you're getting a small portion of armor back. If you're wearing an ICTV, I'm not sure how long it is. I rarely play Anarchist with ICTV. However, the amount of time it takes is longer. However, the amount of armor that you get back is also significantly larger. The interesting thing about Anarchist, and one of the pros I would say, is definitely the fact that you can use it with an armor build or you can use it with a suit build. It's versatile in that sense. I personally think that on 1 down it's a little bit better to run it with the suit due to the slightly better armor or constant armor regen that you're going to be getting. You're just constantly going to be armor gating, which is an incredible thing. On top of the 2 seconds of invulnerability that you get is just honestly phenomenal. Some of the cons, however, though, you do lose a significant amount of health in exchange for the armor. So your armor, in essence, is really, you know, your life source. Snipers will completely eviscerate you on 1 down. I'm using a frenzy build in this particular instance, primarily just for kicks. However, if you're running a frenzy build with Anarchist, particularly if you're using the suit, snipers will just absolutely demolish you. Unless you're sitting at full health and full armor. In most circumstances, snipers will one-shot you if you're running with a suit. This isn't true in every circumstance. However, in most circumstances, snipers are going to be a very prevalent threat. However, an update did drop today where snipers no longer are able to shoot you until they crouch down and their lasers come out, which is something that people have been complaining about for a very long time now. However, now that that's gone, that might not be as big of an issue since you're now able to actually tell what's going on with the snipers and things of that nature. So like I was saying, with this playstyle, it's aggressive and careful simultaneously. You want to be careful because you want to keep an eye on your armor. You want to make sure, you want to make sure that you've got at least some armor. You want to try to keep track of your invulnerability when your armor is breaking. It's a lot of things to kind of mentally keep track of. However, while you're killing enemies, you're going to be getting armor back. While you're dealing damage to enemies, you're getting armor back. If you have Bullseye, you're compounding on top of this even more so. And so this continuous armor gating is what makes this perk deck so strong, is you're able to not really abuse the armor gating mechanic, but really take advantage of how it works in conjunction with the Anarchist perk deck in order to make it harder for enemies just to simply one-shot you. It's still, like I said, you still are pretty frail once your armor is down and your invulnerability period is over. I would say rather weak, actually. But if you're very careful about it, you're able to go head-to-head with a lot of enemy units, bar snipers, that would otherwise kill you pretty readily with other perk decks. Again, you can run this with an armor build, or you can run it with a suit build, just whatever your preference is. And not most other people, but a lot of other people prefer suit just because of the mobility and the faster armor regen ticks that it gives you. And all in all, it's just a very general, very effective thing, and it doesn't take a lot of skill points to make good skill builds. You don't have to sink a bunch of points into armor, you don't have to sink a bunch of points into dodge. You have a lot of leftover points that you can just fool around with for your build, which is definitely a plus side to it if you ask me. So now let's move on to the more interesting perk decks, if you want my honest opinion. Primarily, first of all, we're going to talk about Kingpin. The introduction of Kingpin into the game definitely added quite a bit of, quite frankly, awesome variety in perk decks that I feel like this game was sorely in need of. Unique mechanics, you know, not just adding flat armor rate and not just adding a flat dodge rate and to give you, you know, interesting way to play. Kingpin is an extremely useful perk deck for a variety of reasons. Let's quickly go over the bonuses that it gives you first and foremost. You get a total of 80% extra health, identical to the muscle perk deck. You also are given an injector in replacement of your throwable slot. And 75% of all damage taken while under the effect of the injector is converted into health. You get an extra 25% damage reduction while you're under 50% health, meaning while you're under 50% health, you have 100% damage reduction. The effect of the injector lasts for 6 seconds, has a 30-second cooldown. You get minus 1 second for each 5 health gained at max health. That's a bit harder to control and just kind of happens randomly. Not really something that you can take great advantage of, if you want my personal opinion. One thing to note, however, even though the perk deck doesn't note this, there is a hidden value that when you get kills while the injector is active, it will reduce your cooldown timer by 1 second for each kill, similar to the Sicario perk deck. However, the difference between the Kingpin and the Sicario perks being that with Kingpin you have to get the kills while the injector is active, while with Sicario you can do it while your smoke grenade is recharging. Regardless, some interesting things about the Kingpin perk deck is while your injector is active, you are basically in a pseudo-invulnerable state for approximately 6 seconds. And the only way you can actually die is if on a single shot, meaning a single enemy bullet, if the damage that that bullet does to you exceeds the total amount of health you have, not the amount of health that you have at that current moment, but the total amount of health that you have while using Kingpin, a value that's just a hair over 400, if I'm not mistaken, if I'm not mistaken, that value is 414 health. If an enemy unit does more than 414 damage to you in a single shot when your armor is broken, you will die. What does this mean, essentially? Dozers are your biggest fear when running Kingpin, because even with your injector active, a dozer will one-shot you. And that's pretty much the tail bit of the story. However, all other enemy units you're practically invulnerable to. And I say practically, but you really are just invulnerable to these enemy units for approximately 6 seconds. Dozers, of course, being your biggest fear. It's reliable in the sense that you get to pick when you use the injector. It's not random in any sense. It is completely reliant on your skill to use it, when to pick your spots, and things of that nature. You do get that extra bit of health, which of course does help so other enemy units don't just simply one-shot you. Otherwise, snipers would one-shot you as well when the injector is on. Thankfully, that's not something you have to worry about due to the increased health. But that increased health also helps you have a little bit of extra survivability whenever you're waiting for your injector recharge, which is one of the downsides of this perk deck, is when your injector's recharging, you're kind of squishy. You don't. It's basically a worse version of muscle because you don't have panic and you don't have health or a passive health regen while your injector is down. So that's kind of how you have to think of it. Typically, I run Kingpin with a suit. However, you can run it with ICTV as well. However, I find it to be a bit more effective with the suit simply because of extra mobility, and the ICTV, since you don't get bonuses to armor, really doesn't offer you much extra in terms of taking extra shots, except for maybe chip damage. Doesn't really help in terms of heavy swats, which are the unit you're probably going to be running into most frequently on one down. So, the playstyle associated with this is you can be so hyper-aggressive with Kingpin. You can be ridiculous. You can take crazy risks, push objectives really, really hard. It's just incredible. The things that you can do while using Kingpin. The injector, you're actually able to use it while you are interacting with things. So if you're in the middle of fixing a drill, instead of having to drop the drill, turn around and kill an enemy and restart the interaction, you can just activate the injector, finish fixing the drill, and then deal with the enemy if you have enough time to deal with the enemy before your injector time runs out. It's just really handy in that regard. However, one of the kind of downsides of using Kingpin is lower cover maps are generally a nightmare. Of course, if there's not armor, or if there's not cover for you to effectively hide behind in between injector recharging, you're really screwed. A particular example that comes to mind is the hill section on Heat Street. There's not a lot of cover to hide from enemies. Enemies can come from in front of you, from behind you, and there's nowhere that you can really bunker down if you're in the middle of the hill. An area like that would be a complete nightmare for a Kingpin user, because you have to slowly make your way up the hill while trying to babysit I can't remember what it was. While you're having to babysit Matt, basically. However, due to the bursts of intense ferocity that you can put out while you're using Kingpin, followed by, careful management of cover play whenever your injector is down, Kingpin is just an incredibly effective perk deck. Very consistent, and the only time that I find myself getting frustrated with it is just when I get, caught with my pants down while I'm waiting for my injector to recharge. Because like I said, while your injector is down, this perk deck does lose a lot of its versatility. However, that's kind of what makes it balanced in a sense, is it's really only super good whenever your injector is able to be activated on the spot, and you do have to have that cooldown period before you're able to activate your injector again. And so now we come to one of the most recent additions, actually the most recent perk deck addition to the game as of the creation of this video, and one I haven't really got to talk a lot about specifically outside of run videos where I've used it, and that perk deck that we are about to discuss is Sicario. So, Sicario kind of bridges the gap between Kingpin and Dodge. Sicario gives you a smokescreen throwable that gives dodge bonuses both to you and your crew, as well as decreasing the accuracy of enemies while enemies are in the smokescreen, and it gives you and your teammate 50% bullet avoidance while you're in the smokescreen. We'll discuss what that actually means in a second. That is not a 50% dodge chance while you're in the smoke, like an additive dodge chance while you're in the smoke. It's calculated entirely differently, but we'll talk about that. Your dodge chance is also doubled while you're in the smoke, which is fantastic. It's just all around a really good perk deck. The smoke screen feels very Kingpin-esque. However, you can't use it while you're interacting with objects, which is definitely a con. You have to use it preemptively and you have to use it tactfully, which is kind of the play style that's associated with this perk deck. You do armor gate with dodge. That's kind of like the cushion that I would consider that this perk deck really has. And of course, its primary strength lying in the fact that you have the smoke grenade and you armor regen on dodge. But the dodge is definitely a nice cushion for if you get caught off guard as you're around in a corner or something along those lines. Like I was saying, the smoke screen is just versatile. You can use it to decrease enemy accuracy. You can use it to cover yourself while you're doing an interaction. You can use it by throwing it in the middle of an area and then sprinting through the area, kind of giving yourself a bit of cover in the midst of the area. However, its cons, it kind of suffers from the same cons as Rogue. It's just a worse version of Rogue if you're just comparing the hard numbers of the dodge. you can't use the smoke screen, as I said, while you're actually doing an interaction. You have to do it preemptively, so that's one of the downsides. Like if you're comparing it with Kingpin. And you're not invulnerable when you're using the smoke. The formula that is used to, calculate the amount of bullet avoidance that you have in the smoke, the 50% bullet avoidance, is actually calculated by 1 minus the quantity, 1 minus your dodge, times a half. So basically what that means is, if you were sitting at 20 dodge standard with Sicario, although I think you actually normally sit at 30 dodge if you have Sneaky Bastard. So let's say you have Sneaky Bastard, you're sitting at 30 dodge. In the smoke screen, you're instantly going to double your dodge. So instead of having 30, you're going to have 60, or like 60% dodge chance, or 0.6. 1 minus 0.6 is 0.4. 0.4 times a half is 0.2. And then 1 minus 0.2 is 0.8. So you have an 80% dodge chance when you're in the smoke. I don't think, unless, you know, the Twitch skill is activating when your dodge chance is effectively raised by 20%, which would put you up to 50%. So if you were sitting at 50% dodge after Twitch has been active, of course, this dodge chance resets once after you dodge, so this would only be in effect for like one shot or on alternative shots, or if you take a hit or whatever. But at the absolute most, at one shot at a time, it's 1 minus a half times a half, which is 0.25, and then 1 minus that is 35? How does that dodge chance end up lowering? Regardless, you're not actually getting 100% dodge while you're in the smoke screen, which is contrary to popular belief. So ultimately, when you're looking at, you know, Sicario as a perk deck, it's very versatile and it's really useful. It just is very tactical, I would say, in comparison to other perk decks. It's slightly more tactical than Kingpin in the sense that you can't just go super hyper aggressive at any given moment when your injector is active. You kind of have to pick your spots a little bit. However, you also need to be careful, you know, choose your moments, when to move, when to use a smoke grenade, and so on and so forth, which is one of the big reasons that I like it, is it feels very rewarding to feels very rewarding to use. So that pretty much summarizes what I would consider the top 6 perk decks for one down loud, whether it be for team play or solo play or whatever. It really just comes down to preference, your play style, and what kind of things you want to emphasize in your play. Of course, you know, coordinating with your team and using various other perk decks that might have more team bonuses such as crew chief and things of that nature might be more beneficial in certain niche circumstances. Of course, that all just comes down to coordination with your teammates, or if you're doing solo, just whatever it is you feel like running on that particular day. Alright, so that was one down tips concerning playstyles with the top 6 perk decks, in my humble opinion. And as usual, thank you guys so much for watching.